In Pretoria's glittering Menlyn district, where million-rand cars purr past gleaming towers, Babel Restaurant stood like a temple to wealth. But temples can hide the darkest secrets, and sometimes it takes just one voice to bring them crashing down. The golden hour cast warm light across Babel's floor-to-ceiling windows, each pane reflecting the success stories of South Africa's elite. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks above tables, draped in imported Italian linen. The soft clink of silverware against bone china created a symphony of prosperity, while the gentle hum of hushed conversations carried the weight of million-rand deals and political influence. Executive Chef Henry's creations emerged from the kitchen like edible art. Tender springbok medallions glazed with rooibos reduction, fresh lionfish kissed with Cape Town herbs, wines selected from the finest Stellenbosch estates. Every detail screamed perfection, from the hand-polished marble floors to the fresh orchids replaced daily at a cost that could feed a township family for weeks. Yet beneath this carefully crafted paradise lay a different reality entirely. The staff quarters told another story. In a cramped room behind the kitchen, servers counted crumpled notes with desperate hope, calculating whether tonight's tips might cover tomorrow's taxi fare. Empty coffee cups lined windowsills where exhausted workers grabbed moments of rest between endless shifts that stretched far beyond legal limits. Here, uniforms hung like battle armor, each pressed shirt and polished shoe, representing not pride, but personal expense forced upon those who could least afford it. Work contracts remained mysterious documents that management promised but never delivered, leaving employees vulnerable to the whims of those who held all the power. The hierarchy was absolute and unyielding. At the apex sat Mr. van der Merwe, whose net worth whispered through Pretoria's business circles like urban legend. Some claimed billions, others merely hundreds of millions, but the exact figure mattered less than the control it commanded. His presence could silence a room, his approval could elevate careers, his displeasure could destroy livelihoods with surgical precision. Middle management operated as his enforcers, translating wealth into weapon. They spoke in coded threats about performance standards and professional expectations, while systematically stripping away basic human dignity. Break times became luxuries rather than rights. Sick days turned into unforgivable weaknesses. Speaking up transformed into career suicide. The customers remained blissfully unaware, savoring their R800 steaks while the hands that served them trembled from hunger. These diners, politicians, CEOs, celebrities, saw only the polished performance, never questioning why their servers seemed so grateful for basic courtesy or why fresh faces appeared constantly as others mysteriously vanished. Power flowed through Babel like electricity through copper wire, following predictable paths from the wealthy to the desperate. The system thrived on silence, sustained by fear, protected by the assumption that those at the bottom had no voice worth hearing. Every evening, as Pretoria's skyline transformed into a constellation of office lights and luxury apartment towers, Babel's true nature revealed itself. The restaurant became a stage where South Africa's inequality performed its nightly show, the powerful dining while the powerless served, the wealthy feasting while workers wondered if they'd earn enough to eat tomorrow. The beautiful facade masked a machine designed to extract maximum profit from human desperation. Tips disappeared into management pockets. Wages fell mysteriously short of promises. Basic labor laws bent under the weight of unchecked influence and bought silence. For months, this system operated with clockwork efficiency. The elite had their temple, management had their profits, and workers had their fear. Everyone knew their place in this carefully constructed hierarchy. But every system has its breaking point, every silence its limit, every injustice its eventual reckoning. What happened next would expose a truth that shook an entire industry. If you've ever wondered what really goes on behind the scenes at your favorite upscale restaurant, this story will open your eyes. Stay with us. The alarm buzzed at 4:47 a.m. in Zanele's modest Sunnyside flat, but she was already awake. Sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Not with industrial psychology assignments due and a double shift ahead at Babel. In the pale morning light filtering through thin curtains, she sat cross-legged on her single bed, surrounded by the tools of two different worlds. On her left, a stack of psychology textbooks with highlighted passages about workplace dynamics and human behavior. Understanding Power Structures and Organizations lay open to Chapter 12, its margins filled with her careful notes about exploitation patterns and employee rights. On her right, unpaid electricity bills, rent notices, and the crisp white uniform that would transform her from student to server in a few hours. Zanele lifted the uniform shirt, examining every seam with the precision of someone who understood its true cost. R340, nearly a week's wages, for the mandatory attire that Babel claimed was professional investment. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was studying human psychology while living the very exploitation her textbooks described. She moved to the small ironing board, steam rising as she pressed each fold with deliberate care. Every crisp fold in that uniform represented hope that education would lift her from exploitation. But first, she had to survive tonight. Her phone buzzed with a WhatsApp message from Thabo, her fellow server. "Running late again. Manager threatened to dock pay if I'm not perfect today. My baby was sick all night." Zanele's jaw tightened. Thabo was raising his daughter alone while studying mechanical engineering part-time. Like her, he worked without a contract, without job security, without basic labor protections. The restaurant preferred it that way. Desperate workers asked fewer questions. Another message arrived from Namsa. "They changed my schedule again. 6th time this month. How am I supposed to plan anything?" The manipulation was textbook employer abuse, and Zanele recognized every tactic from her studies. Irregular schedules prevented workers from finding second jobs. Missing contracts eliminated legal recourse. Mandatory expenses like uniforms and cleaning fees trapped employees in cycles of debt. She slipped into the pressed uniform, checking her reflection in the small mirror. The woman staring back wasn't a victim. She was a warrior preparing for battle. Her psychology training had taught her to analyze power dynamics, to recognize manipulation, to understand the system designed to break her spirit. The textbook definitions came alive in her daily reality. Economic coercion occurs when employers exploit workers' financial desperation to impose unfair conditions. She lived that definition 12 hours a day. At Babel, the exploitation followed predictable patterns. Tips mysteriously shrank when management helped with calculations. Overtime pay vanished into administrative processing delays. Sick days triggered thinly veiled threats about reliability concerns. But Zanele saw through the psychological manipulation. When Mr. Merwe praised certain servers as family, she recognized the grooming tactic. When managers blamed workers for customer complaints, she identified the deflection strategy. When the restaurant claimed financial hardship while displaying obvious wealth, she understood the gaslighting technique. Her fellow workers suffered in silence, ground down by systems designed to make resistance seem impossible. Precious worked 16-hour days to support her grandmother's medical bills. Moses sent half his wages to rural family members while surviving on single daily meals. Thandiwe borrowed money for work shoes while her own children went without proper clothing. The restaurant operated on their desperation, feeding off dreams deferred and bills unpaid. Management understood the mathematics of exploitation. Hungry people rarely bite the hands that barely feed them. Yet Zanele's education provided something management couldn't control: intellectual armor against psychological manipulation. She recognized the tactics, understood the patterns, saw the bigger machine operating beneath individual cruelties. As she prepared to leave for another exhausting shift, Zanele caught her reflection one final time. The uniform might belong to Babel, but the mind wearing it remained entirely her own. She was studying the very system that exploited her, building knowledge that would eventually become power. The irony was perfect. They were paying her to learn how to defeat them. She grabbed her psychology notes and headed for the taxi rank, ready to serve the wealthy while secretly documenting their methods. Tonight, like every night, she would smile while they consumed, observe while they commanded, and remember everything while they assumed she understood nothing. Knowledge, she was learning, was the most dangerous weapon a worker could possess. If you've ever worked in the service industry, you know this feeling. Let us know in the comments. Friday night at Babel hummed with the energy of Pretoria's power brokers. The restaurant's main dining room glowed under soft lighting, each table a stage for South Africa's elite to perform their wealth. Ministers whispered policy secrets over rare Karoo lamb. Mining executives sealed deals between courses of Cape seafood. Society wives displayed jewelry worth more than most annual salaries. Zanele moved through this theater of privilege with practiced grace, her psychology training automatically cataloging the social dynamics at play. Table 7. Corporate lawyer establishing dominance through wine selection. Table 12. Politician's wife asserting status by sending back perfectly prepared food. Every interaction followed predictable power scripts. The evening's rhythm felt routine until she approached table 4, where a distinguished gentleman had summoned her with the subtle finger snap that wealthy patrons mistook for discretion. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit clearly bespoke, his companion wearing diamonds that caught the light like trapped stars. "This wine is incorrect," he stated without looking up from his phone. "I ordered the 2015 Canon Cop, not this inferior vintage." Zanele glanced at her order pad, confirming the wine matched exactly what he'd requested. The bottle, a 2015 Canon Cop Paul Sour, sat open on the table, its label clearly visible. Her psychology training kicked in. The customer was performing status, not expressing genuine concern. "I apologize for any confusion, sir," she replied with professional courtesy. "I can double-check with the sommelier, but this appears to be the vintage you." "Are you questioning my knowledge?" His voice rose slightly, drawing attention from neighboring tables. Zanele felt the familiar tension that preceded difficult customer interactions. Her textbooks had prepared her for this. Displaced aggression, where frustrated individuals target those unable to retaliate. She maintained her calm demeanor, ready to diffuse the situation with practiced diplomacy. But she hadn't anticipated the storm approaching from across the restaurant. Mr. van der Merwe materialized beside their table like a predator sensing weakness. His face flushed red with rage, his expensive cologne mixing with the sharp scent of barely controlled fury. The gentle background music seemed to fade as his presence commanded the room's attention. "Are you utterly incompetent?" His voice sliced through the gentle murmur like a blade, arresting every conversation. But it wasn't just words. It was the sound of power crushing dignity in front of an audience who chose to look away. The attack continued with surgical precision. "Do you realize the cost of that bottle? Don't you understand that my reputation and business depend on perfection? How dare you embarrass me in front of my guests?" Time seemed to slow as Zanele's psychology training created a dual awareness. Part of her mind cataloged the public humiliation technique, elevated voice to ensure maximum audience, personal attacks to destroy self-worth, financial emphasis to highlight power disparity. Classic workplace bullying executed with expert malice. The other part of her mind registered the physical impact. Heat flooding her cheeks, heart hammering against her ribs, hands trembling as professional composure crumbled. Around the dining room, conversations halted mid-sentence. Elegant patrons suddenly found their plates fascinating, their wine glasses requiring immediate attention, their phones demanding urgent checking. The silence was deafening. 60 people, politicians, executives, celebrities, all witnessing her humiliation. All choosing complicit blindness. Their comfort mattered more than her dignity. Their evening's pleasure trumped her basic humanity. Van der Merwe's tirade escalated. "This is exactly why this industry struggles. Incompetent staff who can't follow simple instructions. Maybe you should consider whether you're capable of working in an establishment of this caliber." Each word landed like a physical blow, designed to break her spirit in front of an audience that would remember her shame. This wasn't about wine or service. It was about power, demonstrating its absolute dominance over powerlessness. Zanele's psychology training provided painful clarity. She was experiencing textbook psychological abuse, public degradation designed to reinforce social hierarchy. The wealthy patron's silence wasn't accidental. It was participatory, their complicity essential to maintaining systems that elevated them while crushing others. The gentleman at table 4 shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing his minor complaint had triggered this disproportionate response. His companion reached for her wine glass with shaking hands, no longer enjoying the evening's entertainment. But Zanele saw deeper truth in this moment. This wasn't about her supposed incompetence. It was about a system that required her humiliation to function. Merwe needed to publicly destroy her dignity to maintain the psychological control that kept all his workers silent and compliant. Standing there, tears threatening but not yet falling, Zanele felt something crystallize in her chest. Not just anger or humiliation, but a fierce clarity about the machine she'd been feeding with her silence. Her psychology education hadn't just taught her to analyze oppression, it had equipped her to resist it. The room remained frozen, waiting to see if she would apologize, flee, or simply accept her destruction with the expected grace of the powerless. Instead, she looked directly into Merwe's eyes and made a choice that would change everything. Have you witnessed workplace bullying? Your story matters too. The taxi ride home passed in a blur of neon lights and traffic noise, but Zanele heard none of it. Her mind replayed Merwe's words on an endless loop, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. The other passengers chatted about weekend plans and soccer matches while she sat frozen, still feeling the weight of 60 pairs of eyes that had witnessed her humiliation and chosen silence. Her small flat welcomed her with familiar shadows and the distant hum of her neighbor's television. She dropped her bag by the door and stood motionless in the darkness, afraid that moving might shatter whatever composure she had left. The uniform that had felt like armor that morning now clung to her skin like a prison. Sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, the scene replayed with excruciating clarity. Merwe's twisted face, the customer's uncomfortable shifting, the deafening silence of complicit wealth. But worse than the humiliation was the recognition. This wasn't her first degradation, just the most public. Memory after memory surfaced like evidence in a case she'd been building unconsciously for months. The night Thabo was forced to work with pneumonia because calling in sick meant lost wages and threats about reliability. The evening Precious collapsed from exhaustion during a 16-hour shift, only to be scolded for creating drama in front of customers. The morning Moses was docked pay for uniform cleaning, while Merwe arrived in a new Bentley. Each incident had felt isolated, manageable, survivable, but connected together. They revealed a systematic campaign of human destruction disguised as business practice. Zanele reached for her psychology textbook, seeking academic comfort in familiar theories. Chapter 15, Collective Action and Social Change. The words seemed to glow under her bedside lamp. Individual resistance becomes collective power when personal grievances connect to shared experiences of injustice. Her phone buzzed with messages from concerned colleagues who'd heard about the incident through Babel's gossip network. Namsa, heard what happened. You okay? Pandiwe, that was wrong what he did. We all saw it. Moses, sorry sis, he's been worse lately. Reading their sympathy, Zanele felt something shift in her chest. They'd all experienced similar abuse, all suffered in silence, all accepted degradation as the price of employment. The psychology was textbook. Isolated workers couldn't organize, couldn't resist, couldn't imagine alternatives. But what if they weren't isolated anymore? Dawn crept through her thin curtains, painting the room in soft gray light. Zanele sat on her bed's edge, staring at her phone with the intensity of someone making a life-altering decision. Her psychology training had taught her about social movements, about how individual voices could amplify into unstoppable change. In the soft morning light filtering through her modest window, Zanele held her phone with trembling hands. She wasn't just recording a video, she was choosing courage over silence, truth over survival. The first attempt lasted 30 seconds before she stopped, her voice barely a whisper. The second try cracked when emotion overwhelmed preparation. On the third attempt, she found something deeper than fear. Righteous clarity. My name is Zanele, she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. I work at a restaurant in Pretoria, a place that many admire for its glamour, but where the truth is far darker than anyone knows. She spoke about the missing contracts, the stolen tips, the forced expenses that kept workers trapped in poverty. Her voice never wavered as she described the systematic humiliation, the psychological manipulation, the way wealth was built on the broken dignity of those society deemed disposable. Last night, I was publicly humiliated in front of 60 people for defending accuracy over arrogance, she continued, her psychology training helping her frame the incident in its broader context. But this isn't about one bad night. This is about an industry that functions by crushing the spirits of those who serve it. The camera captured more than her words. It revealed her humanity. The slight tremor in her hands, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence blazing in her eyes. This wasn't a victim begging for sympathy. This was a warrior declaring war on injustice. I used to think speaking up would cost me everything, she said, her voice growing stronger. But staying silent has already cost me my dignity, my health, my faith in fairness. How much more can they take before there's nothing left? She paused, gathering courage for the words that would cross the point of no return. My name is Zanele, and I refuse to be invisible. The recording ended, but her hands continued shaking as she stared at the phone screen. This small device now contained a weapon that could destroy her career, make her unemployable, mark her as a troublemaker in an industry that demanded silence. But it also contained something more powerful: truth. Her finger hovered over the post button for several minutes. Once shared, there would be no taking it back, no returning to the safety of anonymity. Merwe's wealth could hire lawyers, buy silence, destroy reputations. She was a poor student with no protection except the honesty of her story. Yet her psychology studies had taught her that power's greatest weapon was the illusion of inevitability. The belief that systems couldn't change, that resistance was futile, that individuals were powerless against institutional might. What if that illusion was just another lie? Zanele took a deep breath and pressed post. Sometimes change starts with one brave person. Subscribe if you believe in standing up. The first hour passed quietly. Zanele refreshed her TikTok page obsessively, watching the view count climb slowly. 47 views, 73 views, 126 views. Her handful of followers, mostly classmates and family, had seen her video, but the wider world remained oblivious to her truth. By hour 2, something shifted. The algorithm noticed engagement. Comments, shares, saves. Strangers began watching, their reactions ranging from shock to recognition to fury. The view count jumped: 847, 1,203, 2,156. Hour 3 brought the breakthrough. A labor rights activist with 50,000 followers shared Zanele's video with the caption, "This is why we fight." The floodgates opened. Views exploded: 15,000, 28,000, 67,000. Comments poured in faster than Zanele could read them. "I worked at a restaurant like this. They stole our tips for administrative costs. My sister was fired for asking about her missing wages. This happens everywhere, and no one talks about it." By morning, hashtag Justice for Zanele was trending nationally. The hashtag became a rallying cry for service workers across South Africa, each adding their own stories of exploitation and abuse. The movement grew organically, authentically, unstoppably. Themba, a waiter from Cape Town, posted, "My boss made us pay for broken plates while he drove 3 different luxury cars. Justice for Zanele showed me I'm not alone." Naledi from Johannesburg shared, "They changed my schedule every week so I couldn't get a second job. Same tactics everywhere. Justice for Zanele." Sarah from Durban revealed, "No contracts, no overtime pay, 14-hour shifts. This is the restaurant industry. Justice for Zanele." The stories multiplied exponentially. Servers, bartenders, kitchen staff, cleaners, all breaking their silence simultaneously. Social media became a confessional where years of suppressed anger found collective voice. News outlets noticed. SABC called first, then ENCA, followed by News 24. Radio stations picked up the story. Newspapers assigned investigative teams. What started as one waitress's truth became a movement that even the wealthiest couldn't buy their way out of. Inside Babel's opulent office, Merwe stared at his laptop screen with growing horror. The video had reached 2.3 million views and climbing. His hands shook as he scrolled through comment after comment, exposing his business practices. "Get me our PR firm immediately," he barked at his assistant. "And call our lawyers. We need to shut this down now." The crisis management team arrived within hours, armed with strategies to contain the narrative. They drafted statements about disgruntled employees and misunderstandings. They prepared defamation lawsuits. They contacted social media platforms requesting removal of false content. But the internet had already made its judgment. Every attempt to suppress the story only amplified it further. When Babel posted a defensive Facebook statement claiming Zanele was a problematic employee, thousands of users descended with screenshots of similar employer responses they'd experienced. The restaurant's Google reviews plummeted from 4.2 stars to 1.6 overnight. Merwe called emergency meetings with his management team. "How did we not see this coming?" he demanded. "Why wasn't she fired before this happened?" His restaurant manager shifted uncomfortably. "She was actually one of our better employees, sir. Never caused problems before." "Well, she's causing problems now." The panic in his voice was unmistakable. Decades of carefully cultivated reputation were crumbling in real time. Dinner reservations canceled. Corporate partners distanced themselves. Investors requested urgent meetings. Meanwhile, government officials took notice. The Department of Labor, usually slow to respond to worker complaints, couldn't ignore a story dominating national headlines. Minister Thulas Nshesi announced an immediate investigation into labor practices at Babel and similar establishments. The investigation team arrived unannounced on Wednesday morning. Labor inspectors, accompanied by police officers, presented warrants and began their methodical examination of Babel's operations. They found exactly what Zanele's video had promised: systematic exploitation disguised as business efficiency. Employee files revealed the absence of proper contracts for 80% of staff. Payroll records showed wages consistently below minimum standards. Timesheets documented shifts exceeding legal limits without overtime compensation. But the most damning evidence sat in Merwe's own office. Spreadsheets calculating employee contribution deductions, a euphemism for stolen tips and forced expenses that boosted profit margins by 23%. Inspector Mandla Sibeko, leading the investigation, had worked labor cases for 15 years but rarely encountered such blatant disregard for worker rights. "This isn't just violation of labor law," he told his team. "This is systematic theft from the most vulnerable employees." The raid lasted 8 hours. Investigators seized computers, financial records, and employment files. They interviewed staff members individually, away from management pressure. The testimonies painted a consistent picture of exploitation, fear, and normalized abuse. Precious revealed she'd worked 60-hour weeks for months without overtime pay. Moses showed receipts for mandatory uniforms that cost 2 weeks' wages. Then Diwe described being forced to pay for customer meals when complaints arose, regardless of fault. Each interview added weight to the case building against Merwe. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, devastating. As news cameras captured investigators leaving with boxes of evidence, Merwe realized his empire was collapsing. The very workers he'd exploited for years had found their voice through one brave woman's truth. Social media celebrated the raid as vindication. Justice for Zanele evolved from hashtag to movement, inspiring worker organizing across industries. Labor unions reported massive increases in membership applications. Other restaurants quietly began improving conditions, fearing their own viral reckonings. Zanele watched the news coverage from her small flat, surrounded by psychology textbooks and messages of support from strangers worldwide. Her simple video had triggered an investigation that would reshape South Africa's service industry. The digital revolution had begun with one voice refusing silence. Now it thundered with millions demanding justice. Share this story. Every voice amplifies justice. 3 days after the Department of Labor raid, Zanele heard the knock she'd been expecting. Through her peephole, she saw 2 men in expensive suits standing outside her modest flat, definitely not neighbors or delivery workers. Their polished shoes and gold watches screamed corporate damage control. She opened the door with the chain still attached. "Yes, Miss Zanele? We represent Babel Restaurant. We'd like to discuss resolving this unfortunate misunderstanding." The older man, introducing himself as Advocate Marcus Steyn, carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than her semester fees. His companion, a younger attorney, held documents that rustled with the authority of legal letterhead. "There's no misunderstanding," Zanele replied calmly. "Everything I said was true. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for the distress you've experienced." Steyn continued, his voice smooth with practiced persuasion. enough to complete your studies debt-free, perhaps start your own practice. Through the narrow door gap he produced a bank draft. The amount made Zanele's breath catch. $500,000. More money than she'd earn in 5 years at Babel, enough to transform her life completely. All we ask is a simple retraction. Acknowledge that emotions were high, that perhaps the situation was misinterpreted. Sign this agreement, and your financial worries disappear. Zanele stared at the check, feeling its gravitational pull. This money could eliminate her student debt, move her family out of poverty, secure her future in ways she'd only dreamed about, all for admitting she'd been wrong about something she knew was absolutely right. The offer expires today, the younger lawyer added. Mr. van der Merwe is being generous, considering the damage to his reputation. Zanele closed the door, leaving the chain attached, and considered the choice before her. 500,000 rand for her silence. Financial freedom for admitting she'd lied about her own humiliation. When she reopened the door, she'd removed the chain but held her phone, recording. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice steady and clear. "This is about Thabo, who worked sick because you don't provide health care. This is about Precious, who collapsed from exhaustion during a double shift. This is about Moses, who sends money to his rural family while surviving on 1 meal a day." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably as Zanele continued. "You're offering me money to betray every worker who trusted me with their stories. 500,000 rand to say that systematic exploitation is acceptable if the price is right." She looked directly into her phone camera. This is how the system maintains itself. They buy silence from the few who find their voices, ensuring the many remain voiceless. Stain's professional composure cracked slightly. "Miss, you're making a mistake. This investigation will find nothing substantial. You'll lose everything and gain nothing." "I've already lost everything that mattered to them," Zanele replied. "My job, my security, my anonymity, but I've gained something they can't take away. The knowledge that I chose truth over comfort." She held up the bank draft and slowly tore it in half. "Tell Mr. van der Merwe that some things aren't for sale." The lawyers left without another word, their briefcase of empty promises useless against conviction money couldn't purchase. Within hours, Zanele's recording of the bribery attempt went viral. The video provided damning evidence of van der Merwe's desperation and transformed public opinion even further against Babel. Comments flooded in, celebrating her integrity while condemning the restaurant's crude attempt at buying silence. The government response was swift and decisive. Labor Minister Nshesi announced expanded investigations into restaurant chains nationwide. Surprise inspections began hitting establishments across major cities, revealing widespread labor violations previously hidden by worker fear and employer impunity. The South African Commercial, Catering and Allied Workers Union reported unprecedented membership applications as workers realized collective action was possible. Labor lawyers volunteered free services to help employees recover stolen wages and fight illegal dismissals. Policy changes followed rapidly. New regulations mandated digital payroll systems to prevent wage theft. Surprise inspection protocols increased enforcement frequency. Whistleblower protections expanded to shield workers from retaliation. But the most significant change was cultural. Workers across industries began speaking up, sharing stories, demanding dignity. The service sector, long characterized by silent suffering, found its collective voice. For van der Merwe, the reckoning arrived with mathematical precision. The Department of Labor imposed fines totaling R3.2 million for labor violations spanning 3 years. The South African Revenue Service launched a tax audit after payroll discrepancies suggested unreported income. The Competition Commission investigated potential cartel behavior among high-end restaurants. Corporate partners terminated contracts. The Pretoria Country Club revoked his membership. Society events that once courted his presence now treated him like toxic waste. Newspapers that had celebrated his business acumen published exposés about his exploitation methods. Babel's staff unionized overnight, demanding back pay, proper contracts, and dignified treatment. When van der Merwe threatened mass layoffs, the union's legal team produced evidence of labor law violations that would trigger additional penalties. The restaurant's reservations dropped by 70%. Food critics published scathing reviews focusing not on cuisine but on exploitation. Social media campaigns encouraged boycotts that devastated revenue. Van der Merwe's empire, built on stolen wages and broken dignity, crumbled with shocking speed. Other business ventures suffered as partners distanced themselves from his toxic brand. Banks questioned loan arrangements tied to questionable labor practices. On a gray Thursday morning, Zanele stood across the street from Babel as government officials led Van der Merwe away in handcuffs. His expensive suit looked wrinkled, his confident swagger replaced by the defeated shuffle of someone whose world had collapsed. As government officials led away the man who once seemed untouchable, Zanele watched from across the street. Power, she realized, was never about money. It was about refusing to stay silent. The crowd of supporters around her cheered as the man who'd publicly humiliated her disappeared into a police vehicle. But Zanele felt no triumph, only quiet satisfaction that justice had mathematical certainty when truth refused to be suppressed. Her phone buzzed with messages from workers nationwide sharing their own victories. Restaurant employees in Cape Town had secured wage increases. Durban servers had won overtime protections. Johannesburg kitchen staff had formed their first union in decades. The movement she'd started with one honest video had become a revolution that transformed an entire industry. 6 months after her viral video changed everything, Zanele stood before 200 labor advocates at the University of Cape Town's School of Economics. The same hands that had once trembled while serving demanding customers now gestured confidently as she addressed South Africa's leading workers' rights experts. "Resistance begins the moment we refuse to accept that exploitation is normal," she told the captivated audience. "Every worker has the power to transform their industry. They just need to believe their voice matters." The scholarship offer had arrived from an unexpected source, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, inspired by her courage to speak truth to power. Full funding for her psychology degree, plus a research position studying workplace dynamics and social justice. The girl who once counted coins for taxi fare now conducted academic research that would inform national labor policy. Her transformation amazed even her. The shy student who'd once feared confrontation had become a sought-after speaker at universities, labor unions, and human rights conferences. But success hadn't changed her core mission, ensuring no worker endured what she'd experienced at Babel. The Zanele Mthembu Foundation, established with donations from supporters worldwide, provided legal aid to exploited workers and emergency funds for those facing retaliation. Her small office in central Pretoria buzzed with activity as volunteer lawyers and activists coordinated cases across the country. "We handle 20 new cases weekly," she explained to visiting journalists. Restaurant workers, retail employees, domestic workers, exploitation crosses all industries. But now people know they have recourse. The foundation's success stories multiplied daily. A Johannesburg cafe worker recovered R45,000 in stolen tips. Durban hotel staff won overtime protections after a 3-month legal battle. Cape Town restaurant employees secured their first collective bargaining agreement in the industry's history. Each victory reinforced the lessons Zanele had learned. Individual courage could catalyze systemic change when amplified by collective action. Meanwhile, Babel Restaurant underwent radical transformation. With Van der Merwe imprisoned for labor violations and tax evasion, new management implemented revolutionary changes. The restaurant became a model workplace, offering above minimum wages, comprehensive benefits, and employee ownership shares. Former Babel workers like Thabo and Precious now served on the restaurant's advisory board, ensuring policies prioritized worker dignity alongside profit. The establishment that once symbolized exploitation had become a beacon of ethical business practice. "We kept the name Babel as a reminder," explained new general manager Nomsa Dlamini, formerly a server who'd suffered under the old regime. "This restaurant represents redemption. Proof that any workplace can change when workers have a voice." The industry-wide transformation exceeded Zanele's wildest expectations. New legislation mandated digital wage tracking, eliminating the mysterious deductions that had plagued service workers for decades. Anonymous reporting systems allowed employees to flag violations without fear of retaliation. Restaurant association leaders, initially resistant to change, now embraced ethical practices as competitive advantages. Establishments proudly displayed fair wage certified logos, attracting customers who valued social responsibility alongside quality cuisine. The ripple effects extended far beyond restaurants. Retail chains improved working conditions after employees organized, using tactics inspired by Zanele's movement. Domestic workers formed unions that secured legal protections previously considered impossible. Even corporate offices reevaluated policies as workers gained confidence to challenge unfair treatment. International attention followed. Labor rights organizations from Kenya to Brazil studied South Africa's rapid transformation, seeking to replicate similar changes in their countries. Zanele addressed the International Labor Organization in Geneva, sharing insights about social media's power to amplify worker voices. But perhaps the most meaningful change was personal. Zanele's relationship with her own power had fundamentally shifted. The woman who once apologized for existing now commanded respect in rooms filled with politicians and executives. "I learned that dignity isn't granted by others, it's claimed by ourselves," she reflected during a quiet moment in her foundation office. "When we refuse to accept less than we deserve, the world has no choice but to listen." Her psychology studies, now focused on organizational justice, provided academic framework for the intuitive understanding she'd gained through lived experience. Her thesis research on power dynamics and service industry exploitation would become required reading in business schools nationwide. The continuing fight for justice required constant vigilance. New cases arrived weekly, workers facing retaliation, employers finding creative ways to circumvent regulations, industries beyond restaurants needing similar transformation. But the infrastructure for change now existed. Worker networks shared information instantly. Legal aid remained accessible. Public opinion supported employees over exploitative employers. The cultural shift Zanele had triggered continued expanding. On quiet evenings, she visited restaurants across Pretoria, observing interactions between staff and management. The changes were visible. Servers standing straighter, managers speaking respectfully, workers confident enough to address concerns without fear. Young people approached her regularly, sharing their own workplace struggles and seeking advice. Her response remained consistent. "Your voice has power. Use it responsibly, but use it boldly." The economic benefits of fair labor practices became undeniable. Restaurants with ethical policies reported lower turnover, higher productivity, and stronger customer loyalty. The business case for treating workers well had been definitively proven. Zanele's story became required curriculum in hospitality management programs, ensuring future industry leaders understood the human cost of exploitation. Business schools developed case studies examining how one employee's courage had transformed an entire sector. As evening approached in her foundation office, Zanele reviewed applications for the scholarship program that would support the next generation of worker advocates. Each application represented another voice preparing to challenge injustice, another potential catalyst for positive change. Her phone displayed the latest statistics. Restaurant industry wages had increased 34% since her viral video. Workplace violations had dropped 67%. Union membership had tripled. The numbers told a story of systematic transformation triggered by individual courage. Today, when young servers clock in at restaurants across Pretoria, they do so with dignity, protected by laws that didn't exist before. One brave woman said, "Enough." Zanele's voice didn't just echo in that restaurant. It echoes in every workplace where justice now has a fighting chance. Her legacy lives in every worker who refuses to accept exploitation as inevitable. Every employer who chooses fairness over profit maximization. Every law that protects dignity over wealth concentration. Change, she had learned, was always possible. It just required someone brave enough to break the silence. What injustice have you witnessed that needs a voice? We all have power to create change, just like Zanele discovered when she refused to stay silent. Subscribe to Hearts Unbroken for more stories of courage that prove ordinary people can achieve extraordinary transformation. Share Zanele's story. Let her courage inspire others to speak truth to power and build a more just world for everyone.